Καλησπέρα και καλώς ήρθατε σε άλλη μία λέση εκφραστικής ανάγνωσης εν μέσω κορονοϊού 2020. Μετά από ένα εκτενές διάλειμμα, ενός περίπου μήνα, επιστρέφω στις μεταδόσεις. Καθότι έχει μπει ο Ιούνιος και ο Ιούνιος είναι ο μήνας υπερηφάνειας, αποφάσισα να ψάξω και τα αγροκείμενα που αφορούν την ΛΟΑΤΚΙ κοινότητα και θα διαβάσω κατά τη διάρκεια του μήνα ορισμένα από αυτά. Θα ξεκινήσω σήμερα με ένα απόσπασμα, το 4ο κεφάλαιο συγκεκριμένα, από το βιβλίο The Queen's Throat, Opera, Homosexuality and the Mystery of Desire του Koestenbaum. The Callas Cult. Maria Callas, immortal, died on September 16, 1977. I've seen documentary footage of mourners sobbing outside her funeral. As the hearse drives away, disconsolate fans applaud the departing body and cheer "Brava Callas," grimly acknowledging that she will give no more performances, that she will never hear this applause, that she craved applause and died for lack of it. To mourn Maria Callas, there cult happiness begins. She was Callas long before she died, but she would be a little less Callas if she were still living. Untimely death assists her legend and connects her to themes that have shadowed gay culture: premature mortality, evanescence, solitude. I never heard Callas perform in person. I am a post-Callas opera queen looking back. I confess that during her life I knew of her only in the role of Aristotle Onassis' mistress. Even now, I don't have an exemplary collection of Callas recordings or a thorough command of Callas lore. Listening to Callas posthumously, I feel like a necrophiliac. But haven't other gays fallen guiltily in love with departed matter? To be a dandy, a useless thing, is to waste time and fortune. And the worshipper of Callas is a waste, going nowhere with his feelings. Callas became an international star in the early 1950s, a time when gay people, though silent and secret, and seeking assimilation and acceptance rather than radical action, were developing a rich culture. Callas remains the operatic diva most closely, if only tacitly, associated with gay fandom. Many Callas commentators are gay. Virtually none consider gayness worth mentioning. Though opera is an elite form, and though Callas's fans were usually at least middle class, and usually white, her image circulated beyond opera culture's borders. Worshipping Callas, am I behaving like a vulture? One critic who objects to the gay cult of Callas is Catherine Clement, who writes in Opera or the Undoing of Women, "Come on, men, shut up. You're living off her. Leave this woman alone, whose job it was to wear gracefully your repressed homosexual fantasies." Callas, an icon already circulating through culture, was not placed on the market at gay men's instigation. Worshipping her, I don't affect the woman sleeping inside the image's shell. My love can't harm dead Callas. And yet homophobic society wants me to abandon my fantasies. To demand that I renounce my veneration is to suggest the desirability of erasing what makes me gay. Gays are considered a dispensable population. Listening to Callas, we become less dispensable. We find a use, a reflection, an elevation. Imagine that one has a soul or an interior. Imagine that one tries to name the sensations of exhaustion or elation buried there. I call my expansions gay. Is the word gay an armor, a disguise, a uniform? A trait of the moment, resonant today, useless tomorrow? You may feel similar exaltations and not be gay, or may not choose to call yourself gay, or may not choose to connect your Callas adoration and your sexuality. But for political, ethical, combative and ineluctable reasons, I consider my interest in Callas to be a piece of my sexual and cultural identity. Here are a dozen attempts to explain the gay cult of Callas, but it's impossible to circumscribe love. As a commentator, one can only operate like a skylight at a premiere, advertising a location. Ask a gay man, a callous nut, why he loves Callas, and he may say, because she's the best. We need to like the best. Excuse the we. I say we without knowing the group's contours. We are not all alike. I say we wishfully, hypothetically. We have been considered the dregs, and so we have constructed hierarchies of taste in which, sometimes against reason, we elevate certain stars to the summit. Because she recorded the soprano repertoire so exhaustively, because every historian and journalist knows she was her era's operatic divinity, and because everyone agrees she transformed the repertoire by reviving forgotten coherencies of song and drama, for these reasons we are doing nothing exceptional by loving Callas. We pretend we like her for solely musical reasons. She is a safe object of adoration. She has snob appeal. She recorded for Angel. What opera lover doesn't recognize and revere Callas, despite querulous, catty reservations? And yet, because of the flaws in her voice, the taste for Callas allows room for argument. To prove Callas's worth, a posthumous, dispersed claque emerges, a nation of solitudes. It is marvellous to adore a queen so undisputed, so deserving, to contribute to a cultural phenomenon, the Callas Revolution, that isn't a back room or a closet. Luchino Visconti, in a photograph, kisses Callas's cheek, which makeup foundation has made unnaturally pale. Leonard Bernstein exclaims, "Callas? She was pure electricity." Visconti and Bernstein loved Callas not because they were gay, but because she was a genius. It is easy and conventional to deny the link between a woman's artistry and a gay man's sympathetic rapture. Bernstein and Visconti would probably have rejected my reductive association of Callas fandom and gay identity. They loved Callas simply because she was sublime. But sublimity has particular currency in gay culture. Greatness of Callas's sort requires reiteration. The comet is gone in a moment. Someone needs to stand around afterward and praise it, recall it, verify it. Callas still needs promulgators. Even now she seems to demand a jury of gay men to vote her not guilty. I worship her because she made mistakes, and because she seemed to value expressivity over loveliness. We don't believe in nature anymore, but Callas put forth the effect of nature as opposed to the appearance of order, and offered an acceptable, digestible anarchy, a set of sounds on the verge of chaos, but enjoyably so. Here lay the danger, the lure. She was a mess, and she was a goddess. Her voice gave evidence of long attempts to domesticate the unacceptable. Recording producer Walter Legge commented that in her muted middle range she sounded as if she were singing into a bottle. Sometimes in her middle range I feel I am travelling on a tour of her sinuses. Enjoying Callas's muffled voice, one declared affinity with hidden things. Her voice dramatically took advantage of the listener's assumption that the opera would go as planned. She ambushed. In Mexico City in 1950 she unfurled a high E-flat without warning, dominating tenor and chorus at the end of the triumphal scene in Aida. Though her mediocre co-star tenor Koestenbaum was furious, the audience loved her unexpected domination. Classical music may seem to demand civility of its performers, but with her high E-flat, Callas stopped serving. Callas's upper register wobbled, a flap. With time, the flap grew less controlled. Commenting on a 1955 Aida, John Nardone points out a flapping high C through which the Egyptian army could have marched. Too much wobbling may sound indecent, schizoid, but to Callas's fans the indecency was endurable and gratifying. Lapses made her a sympathetic figure, a vocal underdog. Some notes, pressed too hard, turned to steel, and when we heard the steel we sympathized with her plight. The steel and the wobble announced the predicament. We loved the mistakes because they seemed autobiographical, because without mediation or guile they wrote a naked heart's wound. And if her notes had a tendency to wobble, to grow harsh, then this possibility of failure gave her fans a function. The infallible performance does not require an audience. Callas's unattractive sounds forced her audience to re-evaluate the difference between the beautiful and the grotesque, and spoke to gays who have often made use, as spectators and creators, of the Gothic. From homophobic culture's point of view, a gay person's soul is a haunted house full of mouldering antechambers and dead-end staircases. Can a gay interior be lovely, or is it at best plush? With peerless technique, I'd call it a form of insouciance if it weren't so intensely willed, she hid her flaws and curbed her unconventional through a glass darkly timbre. In her Paris 1961 rendition of Thomas' Je suis Titania, she holds an awkward high note for its full value, even though the tone is unpleasant. She outstares the ugliness, dares it to ruin her good time. In her 1957 Manon Lescaut, or in her 1964 Tosca, she prepares for the ambiguous high notes with such control of phrase and rhythm and portamento and pitch and attack that we acquiesce, we forgive, and imagine that the note's wretched aspects are a mirror, reflecting the greed demands we make of the singer, and asking us, how would you manage such a note? During the harsh high note we are closer to Callas. We befriend her. Through error she seems to implore, art is punishment, and I am vulnerable. Have you ever been exposed, open up in public? Find parallels in your life to this almost unacceptable note that will make the audience hiss. We love Callas because she revised her body. In 3 years she dropped from 210 pounds to 144 and changed from ugly duckling to glamour queen. Bodies can't always be altered, but Callas's self-revision, like a sex change, makes us believe in the power of wish. Careers with gay followings often have moments of rapture and reinvention, moments when the star's body or persona radically shifts and proves the former self to have been a fabrication. The gay fan, schooled in the gap between public manner and private feeling, may identify less with Callas's newfound glamour than with her former plainness, or he may identify with the rift between the two. Callas revised her image twice, when she lost weight and when she lost her voice. Her body was liability she had the power to revise. Her voice was a virtue she lacked the power to retain. Even where Callas had a voice, she seemed to be losing it. And so a gay interpretation of Callas's career was always, from the start, possible. We know and adore the difference between the Queen's two bodies. Plump, awkward Callas in Athens before her fame, slimmed Callas with dyed blonde hair for the Visconti production of Vestale, Callas in Egyptian drag, dressed as Queen Hatshepsut at the 1957 Waldorf Astoria Imperial Ball. Callas in fancy dress was one of the marvels of the 1950s, for, like her idol Audrey Hepburn, she embodied a Wildian stylization of manner and gesture, as if the depths were dull and lethal, and it was salutary to hover on the surface. The typical Hepburn plot traced her transit from pixie quirkiness to obvious beauty. In Sabrina, Funny Face, or My Fair Lady, no one knows that Hepburn is a knockout until a couturier gets hold of her. But while Hepburn seemed born to be beautiful, Callas had an effortful, wounded relationship to her glamour. What she couldn't wear when she was fat, she wore with spite when she was thin, and she did not make neat distinctions between art and costume. I want my art to be the most perfect, she wrote to her husband. I also want what I wear to be the nicest that exists. At her loveliest, she looks vindictive. She will make people pay for their former indifference. Her operatic performances seemed real. Her real life seemed operatic. Since Oscar Wilde, this confusion between mask and truth has been a cornerstone of gay culture. Even in private life, if we call private the studied scenes of Callas at the airport, at Maxime's, at dressmaker Madame Biquet's, she painted her eyes in the Medea style. Long, coal lines, like a latter-day Cleopatra. The excessive eyeliner proved that she was in charge of her image, that her face was a tablet on which she wrote her life, and that femininity was a lot of work. The labour's reward? Saying, I told you so to a cruel world. Callas's radical weight loss and her stylized approach to matters of dress and makeup gave poignance to her life's plot. She seemed, despite her fame and wealth, a victim of the gender system. Callas's Audrey Hepburn persona, the perfectly groomed society lady, was particularly camp when seen against the feud with her mother, Evangelia Callas, who wrote a scandalous exposé entitled My Daughter Maria Callas. Evangelia's own excesses are exposed in Sisters, the confessions of Jackie Callas, Maria's sister. Mrs. Callas publicized her work as jewellery saleswoman at the shop of Jolly Gabor, mother of Zaza and Eva, to humiliate Maria for refusing to send money. Maria wrote to her mother, "Don't come to us with your troubles. I had to work for my money, and you are young enough to work too. If you can't make enough money to live on, you can jump out of the window or drown yourself." No ordinary cow, Callas had the effrontery to break with her mother and dress up. Queen Callas emerged from the chrysalis of the dumpy diva. Another fabled trajectory was rootless, nationless Maria turning into a Greek woman profoundly identified with her homeland. Her apotheosis was singing Norma at Epidaurus. Some say her voice had a quintessentially Greek timbre. As a Greek, Callas was an outsider to La Scala, Covent Garden, the Paris Opera, the Met, turfs she conquered. The outsider who enters a field and vanquishes all opposition is an appealing figure, and not only to gaze. Born Maria Anna Cecilia Sophia Kalogeropoulos, Maria Callas was imagined to hide an authentic and exotic Greek nature, which explained her notorious romance with Aristotle Onassis, and which gave her the status of a goddess, just as her overweight and impoverished beginnings emphasized a realness, a stigma, a wound, beneath the jet-set splendor. We love Callas because she disciplined her voice. The realm of discipline is itself a part of gay culture. Weightlifters, S&M, pageants of control and self-mastery. Callas cleaned up her voice with excruciating and exhilarating thoroughness, and disciplined her phrases as severely as she disciplined her servants. She gave her staff an authoritarian list of house rules. When you are summoned by us, you will come immediately and always perfectly dressed. One will never say no to what has been asked, and no more of that "yes sir, yes ma'am" nonsense. Everyone, including the housekeeper, will wash and iron their own garments, especially intimate items. At home and on stage, Callas commanded. Callas was a trooper, a perfectionist, on time to rehearsals, willing to sing an aria again and again to get it right. Musical exactitude justified her caprices, and proved to her detractors that she behaved strictly, without excess or indulgence. She spoke fondly of doing vocal exercises and of various mentors. Of Tullio Serafin she said, "I'm afraid he's the last of those kind of maestri." She loves the word maestri and the notion of mastery. When Callas gives every damned pitch in a difficult run from Lucia or Norma, another singer would not be so thorough and clean, or when she reminds my listening ear that there is a vast difference between eighth notes and triplets, or between half-steps and whole steps, her precision makes my mouth gape, and tells me how calloused her feet must be from walking without shoes this far up the hill to magnificence. Maria Callas, like Joan Crawford's Mildred Pierce, was a model of the career woman who succeeds only because she is viciously ambitious, and because she has given up her capacities to be a good daughter and a good mother. One can enjoy the self-lashing aspects of Callas's career, however, and jettison the underlying anti-feminist moral by taking Maria Callas as proof that roles can be reversed, that destinies can be chosen, whether or not it is actually possible to alter the material conditions underlying our fates. The story of Callas, a fable, makes us believe in the power of individual fantasy. Similarly, we imagine that choosing to be gay, even at the cost of martyrdom, is a cataclysmic act, capable of transforming private destinies and public systems. Callas swore by these axioms. Study the words of an opera, and you will understand how to colour the note or shape the phrase. Give each note its proper value and weight, and you will reveal the score's internal mysteries. Each musical moment stamped with Callas the perfectionist simultaneously thrills us by its sublimity. Thank God I am alive to hear this phrase from a barbiere sung so accurately, and by its masochism. She sacrificed so much to achieve this perfection, and may I, by God's grace, learn to find ennobling uses for my inborn or acquired masochisms. We love her for intruding, via magisterial discipline, such a range of mannerisms, a control of how a phrase might always, every moment, mean something. This control made her an avatar of speakability, of the ability to say painful and illuminating truths, and to shroud those truths in a medium that leaves its messages shadowy and subliminal. Music conceals the arguments it sinuously advances. We consider music to be merely expressive, but when expressivity happens, something particular is usually being expressed. Sometimes her singing sounds like weeping. The suffering seems to arise from the discipline of music-making and the discipline of woman-making. She is irretrievable, and so I want to retrieve her. She departed before the world could surround her with sufficient adulation. Evanescence and transience, Modern gay literatures are obsessed with a desire to be immortal and to press against the moment's confines. Gay figurehead Blanche Dubois mooned, "Don't you just love these long rainy afternoons in New Orleans, when an hour isn't just an hour, but a little piece of eternity dropped into your hands?" Callas sang in the air of Sunset Boulevard. In legend, she became a Norma Desmond, unable to bear very much reality, dreaming of impossible comebacks. After the affair with Onassis began, she had a vocal crisis, retired, and then returned to the stage. She collapsed at the Paris Opera after the third act was Norma. She sang one more Tosca in London, and then she never sang an opera again. She returned to the recording studio. The results were too ambiguous for release. She taught master classes in 1971 and 1972 at Juilliard. I love the picture of Callas at Juilliard in black pantsuit and dour reading glasses because I love to see a divinity become practical and serve a function. I love to see majesty drop to earth in no-nonsense black, majesty in need of glasses, majesty in the fashions of 1971, which are flattering to no one. She returned to the stage with Di Stefano in 1973-74 for a world tour of duo recitals. A voice in ruins, say witnesses. The has-been inhabits of mythical neighbourhood. I am not a has-been. I am, like most fans, a never-been. Has-beens and never-beens have much in common, and so I visited the Avenue Jules Mandel in Paris, where Callas lived, isolated, before her death. I wanted to experience that neighbourhood of silence. I wanted to verify the photograph I've stared at so long, an often reprinted shot of Callas opening or shutting the curtains of a spacious window that looks like it never lets in light, an image of a soul shut into a role and not knowing the way out. Zeffirelli's movie of La Traviata, an elegy, an homage to Callas, a memorial to her vanished voice, shows us Violetta's apartment first from the outside. We see Violetta's window. It is just like Callas's. That aloof window is the sign of a grandeur and a sickness, a consumption forever closed. Think of the spaces shut to us. Think of the rooms, our rooms, we have never named. Voice is a room. It opens for an instant in a great operatic career. But most of the time the room is closed off to knowledge and to memory. On the cover of Callas's reissued recordings are photographs of the singer after retirement, to underscore the tragedy of the woman who outlived her voice. She smiles, radiant in simple outfits and pearl earrings, but we know better. We know she's miserable. We know the record within the sleeve contains the trace of her past. Callas and her legendary voice have parted company. Gay people have compensated for silence by enjoying the ironic or tragic transformation of power into pathos. We relish falls. Sublimity turns into degradation, and our interest quickens, not because we are sadistic sickos, but because we like to see reputations, or the very idea of reputation, decompose. When we value Callas for creating a revolution in operatic performance practice, for singing neglected Bellini and Donizetti operas as if they were tragic vehicles of undiminished power, we are valuing her for opening up the opera box, the closed space of a genre that never seemed to let us in or to let our meanings out. And yet, ironically, her revitalizations of dismissed bel canto operas only emphasized opera's moribund nature. Innovators like Peter Sellers highlight opera's anachronism and turn opera's liability into an expressive strength. Anachronism was one aspect of opera that long ago opened it to gay appropriation. Opera seemed campy and therefore available to gay audiences only when it had become an outdated art form, sung in foreign languages, with confused, implausible plots. Opera's apparent distance from contemporary life made it a refuge for gays, who were creations of modern sexual systems, and yet whom society could not acknowledge or accommodate. Opera is not very real, but gayness has never been admitted into the precincts of reality. And so gays may seek out art that does not respect the genuine. Superficially, Maria Callas took away opera's campiness by making it believable and vivid. And yet by importing truth into opera and art of the false, she gave the gay fan a dissonance to match his own. Bestowing verisimilitude on Lucia, or Norma, or Elvira, Callas perforated the opera-goer's complacency. Her voice and her presence, arsenals of depth, when brought to bear on music that had become superficial, upset the audience's sense of perspective. Though it seems sacrilegious to call Callas's musically compelling creations camp, She performed the same kind of reversal that camp induces. She shattered the codes that separate dead from living works of art. To cross-cut rapidly between yesterday and today is an effect that, in different circumstances, we recognize as camp. Callas camped Lucia not by mocking it, Lucia is too easy to mock, but by taking it seriously. Resuscitating Lucia, Callas challenged our belief that history's movement is linear, that there is a difference between past and present, and that modern reality is real. We love her because she incarnated vocal multiplicity and heterogeneity. She had 3 voices, chest tones like a contralto, an inconsistent, cloudy yet beautiful middle register, and a piercing top that was fleet in coloratura but often metallic. One colleague said that Callas had 300 voices. Callas, a chameleon, stepped in and out of registers like quick costume changes. But she was often criticized for the multiplicity. She couldn't cross over the bridge between voices and then make the bridge vanish. We often heard the bridge, and so her voice seemed a cubist painting composed of angles not organized into easily interpretable wholes, an eye, a nose, a brow. Like the 3 faces of Eve, Callas's vocal split personality affliction was a timely image of what society believed to be woman's intrinsically various and Circean nature, and gay men could identify with this vision of fractured woman. Callas's divided voice seemed to mirror the queer soul's incoherences. Callas became famous for singing Die Walküre and I Puritani 3 days apart at Teatro La Fenice, and for taking only a week to learn Puritani. In one throat, she reconciled 2 vocal types, the dramatic soprano and the coloratura lyric. Even her rival, Renata Tebaldi, admitted the pleasurable shock of hearing Callas's heavy voice in the light repertoire. Callas's assumption of bel canto roles after establishing credentials as a dramatic soprano was an affront to fixed vocal categories and to the gender distinctions built into them. Commentators describe Callas as a reincarnation of a kind of singer that flourished in opera's golden age, a singer who could span all ranges and styles. We admire Callas for exceeding and giving the lie to modern measurements. No note she sings remains the same. She changes voice inside the note, as if to say, try to catch me, to name me, to confine me in your brutalizing classifications. Every body is a civil war. Callas sang the war. Most singers of Callas's caliber hide the register break. Callas couldn't. The naked break shows her to be, though a genius, a bit of a freak, delightfully self-embarrassing, unable to control herself in this tiny matter on which bel canto art depends. The break between registers is the moment when the voice proves itself to be of 2 minds. Compare her 1953 Lucia and her 1959 Lucia. Although her tone is darker in the 1959 version, her register break is tranquilized, and so she travels up and down without disgrace. A subdued Callas, a Callas about to quit. Callas took in breath dramatically, audibly, as if she were gasping. She turned the need to breathe into an expressive opportunity. But the gasp also revealed the cost of music making. Phrases need to come from somewhere in the body. Some load undiscovered where power sleeps. The gasp is the price tag on the expensive garment of the aria. Words like gay or queer are crude, and Callas would not have approved of them. But I imagine she would have approved of this task, revealing the abjection and the sadness that lie buried in listening. I adore Callas because she so frequently expresses fury, a wrath that is its own reward and its own argument, that seeks no external justification, that makes no claim beyond the pleasure of drive, of emotion, of expressing why I have been wronged. A tribunal, she doesn't just express what she feels, but expresses what the universe should feel about a predicament. Every great Callas phrase of jealousy and fury becomes a command. Universe, listen. Universe, obey. Universe, assume my point of view. And we have visual images of her voice's tendency to radiate anger. Think of Callas as Medea or Tosca, holding the knife, her eyes shooting sparks, a painted mouth, a line drawing of rage, as in the tigress photo taken backstage in Chicago when process servers tried to hand her a summons. But sometimes she sings like an innocent. John Ardoin calls this sound her little girl voice. She mutes the tone, makes it reedy and demure, holds back power. She uses this restrained voice to impersonate virgins like Amina, or to mark the difference in a role like Butterfly or Lucia between schoolgirl piety and murderous maturity. Pretending to be innocent, she portrays instead detachment from naive states. This coy voice sets in relief the rage she more frequently and convincingly expresses. Sometimes the little girl voice doesn't convey innocence, but a spectral emptiness. Gay men may identify with demonstrations of female wrath and willfulness because such behaviour so wholeheartedly exceeds the bounds of acceptable gender behaviour. Displays of masculine power are alienating and depressing. They reflect patriarchy's sway, but displays of feminine power show the universe executing an about-face. Her vengeful volleys give us courage and inspire us as we struggle to be open and not closed, serene and not erased, human and not degenerate. I feast on her workouts, her cancellations, on all the scandals emanating from these outbursts, which have nothing to do with music, but which seem to emerge from her vocalism, her sudden flashes of chest tone, her searing firecracker diction, the rolled R, and the pugnacious dental and the narrow nasal oblong vowel. These terrifying effects denote revenge, murder, and the realm of wish, pushed to pathetic yet enviable extremes. She fought impresarios and conductors, a feud with Serafin because he recorded Traviata with another soprano, Antonietta Stella, battles with Rudolf Bing, the Edinburgh cancellation, the time she threatened to brain a hostile impresario with a bronze inkstand, and then her husband said she weighed over 200 pounds, forcefully drew her knee into the offender's stomach. But the most famous disobedience was the Rome walkout. Although ill, Callas was persuaded to sing a scheduled gala performance of Norma. The Rome opera had hired no cover, and Italy's president was in the audience. Callas sang the first act, but was in poor voice. When she refused to go on for the second act, management begged her at least to speak her lines. Adamant, she left the theatre through an underpass, like the Phantom of the Opera. Scandale! One could purchase a pirate recording of that failed first act. I've withstood the temptation. I imagine that the record circulates primarily among gay fans who love, as I do, the aura of a woman who walks out of the closet of her role, defies the president, and places her throat's health over an opera house's rules. About the Führer, Callas later said, with her inimitable blinkered rhetoric of self-defence, there was a lawsuit. We fought twice, and I won twice. I had deceived nobody. I never do. I am a very simple woman, and I am a very moral woman. I do not mean that I claim to be a good woman, as the word is. That is for others to judge. But I am a moral woman in that I see clearly what is right and wrong for me, and I do not confuse them or evade them. Adoring Callas, I am admiring breakdown, resistance, walkout, flight, and feud. Because of the Tebaldi-Callas feud, choosing Callas isn't a neutral or pacific experience. It means taking sides and shutting down the faculties of sympathy and softness. Callas called Tebaldi her dear colleague and friend, but Renata, unable to match the breadth of Maria's repertoire, finally left the Scala. Rivals I have not, claimed Callas. Eventually the two women embraced backstage after a 1968 Tebaldi opening night met performance of Adriana Lecouvreur. Maria had already retired. Even on records, Callas seems to require devotion, not toleration. To enjoy Callas, one must renounce Tebaldi's virtues and adopt Callas as a cause for life. Though Callas often piously thanked God for her good fortune, as if God cared about Callas's career, her fan must forswear decency and embrace the pleasure of partisanship. The Callas Clark is an underworld order like a revolutionary cadre, the Communist Party or the Mattachine Society. Fetishist that I am, I focus my shame on the word Callas. I am embarrassed to say the name as she and her crowd said it, the huge R. Callas, neither syllable emphasized at the cost of the other, the two syllables distinct from any others in the world. Saying Callas fills my mouth with fruity sensation. Callas, an odd, invented name, is a telling near anagram of Pablo Casals, cellist who nobly refused to play in Spain after Franco came to power and who performed at the Kennedy White House. Casals represented the interpreter as a saint. Callas, too, was a kind of saint, but a rearranged one. Turn the word Callas inside out, fans at La Scala cheering Callas, 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 found their chant turning into Scala, 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 as if Callas were the container as well as the object contained. Deciding to love Callas, you fall into a category, the Callas fan. It's a sweet, drowsy membership. I can stare all day at the photograph of Callas in off-stage life, wearing a veil and white gloves and pearls. her ineffably sad eyes elongated by makeup, her ears large, her mien arrogant and refined, her regal brutishness distinct from her musicianship, which was a matter of gift, work, intelligence. Built into the love of Callas is a fear of not doing her justice, never doing her justice. The attempt to account for the love of Callas is a sham and a transgression. All divas, when they sing, when they emerge from apprenticeship into the spotlight, come out. But Callas came out vocally with unique flamboyance at a time when coming out was nearly impossible for queers. Even within operatic singing's straitjacket, Callas used the word straitjacketing to describe the first stage of starting a new role, that phase when she learned the notes exactly as they were written, she appeared always to be exposing a secret shame and a corresponding power. She was celebrated for tailoring phrases in an opera to suit a specific extra-musical situation, for aiming a death threat line at the box of La Scala's impresario Antonio Chirichinelli, or giving a rendition of Medea in Dallas with a fury that seemed directed at Rudolph Bing, who had just cancelled her Met contract. Her uniquely emotive singing style parallels the method acting that was fashionable in 1950s North American cinema, Brando, Dean, Clift, Monroe. Method acting is a style of the closet and of the closet's collapse. The actor brings private, undisclosable woes to bear on the part. And yet the strain and effort in method performances, the seething and stammering and stumbling, prove the sturdiness of the walls locking in the not yet spoken self. The performer needs to grunt and moan and cry in order to break through the policed border between private and public. Callas makes us sick of camouflage. After hearing Callas, who could tolerate the closet? And yet the evidence of Callas's broken spirit makes us nostalgic for the closet. Maybe for a moment we want to step back in. It is easy to see why Callas appeals to the drag queen in me, because Callas in motion, I rely on the evidence of films, is a sinuous, studied spectacle that one could forever simulate but never match. Long arms, hands gliding slowly toward the shoulders to acknowledge thunderous applause, large nose and archaic eyes, hair usually piled in a voluminous chignon but sometimes loose and sometimes flat as happens, left bank bob in a funny face, each different hairdo transforming Callas's features, so it's hard to know precisely what she looks like. I don't want to steal, imitate or distort Callas's gestures, but I notice them and I feel noticed by them. A greedy manipulation of physical space draws me into fuller life, even if, on the day of her funeral, September 20th, 1977, I was marking my 19th birthday and had never heard Maria Callas, whose voice and image would posthumously drape tapestries over me. Her speaking voice was odd. She always seemed to be setting the record straight or proving herself to be oblique as a Modigliani, simulating behaviours she couldn't pass off as genuine. Her English was affected and full of non sequiturs. In an interview she said, "Every time a taxi driver recognizes me, it astonishes me. It irritates me. You know, I don't go out very much. I don't put myself on exhibit. I live in seclusion. I am wild. Very." Only the banality of an exceptional person like Callas has the power to induce in the observer that dizzy pleasurable sensation of identification which is my subject here. Rilke wanted the angels to answer him. He knew they wouldn't. Every modern sad soul wants an answer from the void. Callas is one figure to whom some gay men have recently looked for reciprocation and confirmation. Confirmation of what? Life's grimness, and the power of expressivity to alleviate the grimness or to give the illusion of succour. Late in her short life, she begged Tito Gobbi to take her out for an ice cream. She imagined that the world had abandoned her. The epigraph to Charles Ludlam's Gallas, "Only my dogs will not betray me." In a photograph, Visconti wraps his arms tightly around Callas and kisses her on the cheek. It looks to be a firm, authentic kiss, and she smiles, flattered and gratified to be kissed. Zeffirelli, doughy and devoted, kisses Callas and she smiles radiantly, knowing the limits of the kiss. Bernstein holds Callas's hands and studies her, and they seem to be playing a seesaw game, figuring out whether their bodies are equivalent. Gaunt and shirtless, Pasolini directs Callas as Medea, and she is attentive, obediently holding her hands to her face. These photographs attest to a specific historic configuration. The gay man venerating the theatrical woman, and the woman responding gaily, the woman imitating the gay man, and the gay man imitating the woman, the gay man directing and then listening and admiring, the man and woman collaborating. Poring over Callas, I'm like Manuel Puig's Molina, the gay window dresser in Kiss of the Spider-Woman, who sustains his cellmate and himself in prison by reciting the plots of movies. One of the movies he recites is Nazi propaganda, but Molina doesn't understand the film's sinister ideology. He thinks it is a wonderful romance. His love for stars blinds him to political emergencies. Of course I feel guilty for my imaginary romance with Callas's voice, but I don't know who is harmed by the worship. Certainly not Callas. Are you harmed? I imagine that you harbour similar attachments, that you too send your love to a vague, aloof star in the cultural firmament, a radiance that will never reward you with a glance, though you have spent your life in patient, earnest, fruitless attendance. Visconti said of Callas that she was a monstrous phenomenon, almost a sickness, the kind of actress that has passed for all time. Is Callas, within gay culture, the embodiment of homosexuality as a monstrosity we are and abhor and adore? No, Callas was not a sickness. Callas was a refuge, where a forbidden sexuality, a forbidden alienation from masculinity could spread its wings. Listening to Callas, I acquire spaciousness. If consciousness, as determined by gender and sexuality, has certain limits, a voice like Callas's has the power to turn the mind's closed room into an immensity. She bestows the illusion that the view continues endlessly on the other side of the mirror, and that wherever you expected to confront limits, instead you find continuations. I have been speaking about gayness as if I knew what it meant. I don't. It's a mirage. Gayness isn't my rock-bottom nature. Rather, I listen for and toward gayness. I approach it as one approaches a vanishing point, or as one tries to match a pitch that is fading into a vast silence. Walter Legge, who produced many of Callas's legendary recordings, once peered inside her mouth and remarked that it was shaped like a Gothic cathedral. In imagination, I am staring into Callas's mouth to see her upper palate's high spires, like far Christminster to Thomas Hardy's Jude, who gazes at the horizon, but will never reach the imaginary city that gleams there. Καλό βράδυ.